Okay, well, it's a 1:45, and we'll get started gradually, gently, softly, easily. We are missing one of our presenters, but I'm very happy to welcome Eva. My name is Sarah Marshall, and I'm a doctoral scholar, and I'm the chair of this session. This is session R10, Changing Teacher Practices. We are supposed to have two 20-minute presentations with a breakout room at the end. So Eva's going to speak to us on supporting faculty supervisors, which everybody supports the idea. So we'll learn more from Eva. And then from Shanmugavalli or Anila, we're supposed to have collaborative team learning. Before we start, just a gentle reminder that this session is being recorded. So if you wish, please feel free to turn off your video and rename yourselves, no problem. And with that, I'll have Eva carry on. I'll stop my screen share and away you go.
Sorry, I'm just trying to change my view here somehow. Gallery view. There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. So my talk today is about supporting faculty supervisors to foster the reflective practice of student teachers. And it's within this sort of stream of changing teaching practices in higher education. So in that context, this talk relates to authentic learning, authentic assessment, trying to link coursework to real world practices, and engaging community members in the process of learning and assessment. So in teacher education, there's a strong history of trying to create critically reflective practitioners, and that relates to literature. I'm sure people have heard of Schoen and people like that who talk about critically reflective practitioners. It also relates to the literature from psychology, self-regulated learning literature, and those models. Different people are involved in these different camps, but to me, they're very, very similar at heart in terms of what kind of teaching practices you engage in to try and encourage people to become self-regulated learners, to become critically reflective practitioners. In self-regulated learning, you may have heard those models like the Zimmerman model, very famous, forethought, performance, and so you act and then you reflect and then it goes back to planning, then to action again, and then reflection in an iterative cycle. In reflective practice in the teacher education literature, we tend to use different words, but in essence, we're talking about a very similar phenomenon. So in teacher education, it's become more and more popular, even though it always was popular, especially with the advent of competency development being a big focus. And I know in CJEBs now, we have competencies being introduced, and teacher education works with competencies, as do programs the ministry certifies. And so instead of, we talk about the development of students' competencies over time, and it's a more sort of authentic way perhaps, or it certainly lends itself to these models of more authentic assessment and authentic teaching practices. Sometimes people say after they finish teacher education and they go into the quote real world, I'm not sure which real world they really mean, but they're that real world they talk about, and they say, I learned everything in practice. I never learned anything in my university leading up to it. That's pretty distressing if you think of the years they supposedly wasted in teacher education. So when you think about it, what we want is that they're connecting what they're learning in their coursework to actual real world practices, and that those connections and links are made. But for all of us who work in this kind of area where you have practicums and coursework, I'm sure we all experience across disciplines this sort of schism. So this project was sort of an attempt to try to really make those links happen more, and to help students apply what they're learning in their coursework to what they're doing in their actual quote real world practices. And in teacher ed, critical reflections are very common, and so are using portfolios. And portfolios are way in now, getting more and more in around, and everyone will be hearing about it. I can't say that I appreciate all the ways they're being done, because really they should be complex problem solving activity, and they should be unique. and not just a little checklist that you say, oh, I handled my portfolio. But ideally, teachers would all have professional portfolios. And in my mind, we all would have portfolios, not just for our professional life, but to be better people, to be self-regulated, reflective people who engage in our lives, make improvements, have growth, and are able to reflect deeply upon what we've been learning and how to make improvements. So this project is all within that kind of background of using critical reflections during practicums, making portfolios, trying to encourage students to become more critically reflective. And this project, it was really fun at the time, but it's a little sad because we got cut off. So we did it the year before last, the actual implementation, and then we were supposed to do it again last year, and in March, chaos broke out on the world level and all of our practicums were canceled. And so I didn't get to do year 2. And then this year I thought would be year 2, but facing my students and the pressures they were under and the faculty supervisors, I just felt it wasn't the time to engage in. I regret it in some ways, but it was such a hard time to ask people to do anything more or different beyond what we already were dealing with because they were supervising at a distance. So the project is, I hope we can pick it up again next year, but instead of being last year and the year before, we're limited to what happened the year before last at this point. One of the things that was really important to us in this project was also, so faculty supervisors are people, sometimes they're faculty, sometimes, but usually they're people we hire from the outside, retired principals. People in the school system never retire. They retire and then they do things like this. They are active, you know, they scare me because I'm like, your third retirement party. It's like never stops, you know, but they really are just dedicated. And so these are usually people who've been principals, vice principals, lifetime teachers who are bored if they can't just keep making a difference. And so they go into the schools, observe our students teaching, evaluate our students, support them. Sometimes faculty do it, but that became expensive. And so there's been some cutting back of that. But having them engage meaningfully with us, with the faculty, with understanding the coursework we're doing, all of those things were important to me, that we bring them in. So they're not just like outsiders who do this thing, the practicum, but they're insiders who are doing this collaborative process where we are all helping create and mold these student teachers together. And that's another aspect of sort of the authenticity of it, is that the real world practitioners are all part of the project. So in the project itself, we considered it participatory action research. It's, in my mind, design-based research. And this is the first brick of an iterative cycle that comes from McKinney and Reeves. I like that metaphor, the first brick. But you imagine it evolving over time and changing the research questions as you go. And this is just the very beginning piece. And hopefully it will become a multi-phase design-based research project, but it isn't yet. And we had 6-week practicums. These are for our students who will be graduating from their undergraduate degree, but it's not their last practicum. It is the last practicum, though, of their undergraduate degree, and they're in the field for 6 weeks. And we have an integrated field-based semester that semester, which I think is really, really important for teacher education, where you have them take some courses, they do a practicum, and then they come back to their coursework. It's not always very popular with the students, but it's all part of trying to integrate coursework with the practicum in a meaningful way. And our participants were 21 faculty supervisors. There were 43 students. And we got funded by I got money from the Entente Canada Quebec people, which is very sweet. So we were able to pay facilitators who are 2 graduates of our program, who are teachers, and they help do comments during the process because it's a lot of work for the faculty involved. And it also involved the practice teaching director. So it was a group of, you know, all the different parties involved. And the data I have is the supervisor activity online, and this is focused on the supervisor's view, not the students, the supervisor's activity online. and they filled out an anonymous survey. And we also did one-on-one informal discussions and interviews, and we had discussions with the entire group of faculty supervisors. It was really nice. We were able to take them to a really nice place out in the townships, the Manwar Havi. I don't know if any of you know that. Beautiful place, such a nice place. And we can't pay them to participate in this professional development, but it's a way of, everyone showed up. I was like, it's amazing, they're all here. But who would pass up on a wonderful professional development opportunity at a beautiful place? And so we got data from that too, because they were all there. And in the procedures, we did do professional development over 2 half days before the practicum started with the faculty supervisors, focusing on how do you support the reflective practice of your student teachers, something all the faculty talk about, but they weren't always talking about. We also developed a customized WordPress site where the students were sharing their critical reflections and building portfolios. And then we had, in the 6-week practicum, the students posted weekly critical reflections. And I've done this before as the instructor of a course, and they're going into Moodle and they're, their learning management system, and they're posting in their groups. But the big difference here was that the faculty supervisors that they were assigned were reading the same reflections that they were writing for me. So in previous years, they would write critical reflections for their own faculty supervisors, but they wouldn't actually, and they would write critical reflections for an instructor, but those weren't the same critical reflections, which is really weird. And so it was very interesting that we were involving the actual faculty supervisors in trying to read these. It was added workload for them, but it was another avenue for them to communicate with their student teachers. In the groups, we did have them in peer groups still. So the elementary students, it was based on their cycle, like if they were teaching K or cycle 1, grade 1, 2, or cycle 2, grade 3, 4, or cycle 3, grade 5, 6. And in the secondary students, it was on their discipline. So if they were teaching TESOL, or if they were teaching sciences or social sciences. And often the supervisors are also done that way. And the supervisor was able to read and comment on only their own student teachers' reflections, but they could see the other comments left by peers in the group. And the facilitators I mentioned, we had two graduates of our program who helped go in and comment, because it's pretty hard to keep up as an instructor during the practicum with those weekly reflections in a meaningful way. And so these sort of, and it added to the authenticity and, I don't know, the feeling that of importance or significance of the sharing, because it wasn't just your instructor. It was people in the field who might hire you one day or whatever. So there was a different feeling to it. The development of the site was pretty fun. It was a WordPress site, and I do have time, so I think I will share my screen briefly just to show a little of the site. I hate the way Zoom cuts everyone off when you share your screen, but for this purpose, I think it's worth it. So it was in WordPress, and we customized it. And to make it really easy, because some of the faculty supervisors are not particularly technologically adapted, or very, it's hard for them. And so in that they're a much older population usually, and they didn't do any of this themselves. So we actually, programmed it. So instead of having to go into each student's site, they actually just had the links sitting there on their own site. They had to go into their own site, and then they could see each of their students' links sitting there. And that seemed to make it a lot easier for those of they who were not particularly technologically happy, because they could just click on the link. But really, that was all done to make it easier for them. Normally, you would just tell them, here's the site of your students, but it felt important to help show them. And the way we did it was, I just wanted to show you this part. So they could, sorry, I went to the wrong place. I'm trying to show you where a supervisor could see it. So you would actually see, here's, oh, that's the wrong one. I don't know. I think I mixed up my slides. Anyway, here is a professor's site. She can, a supervisor, she can see the different links. And then if she clicks on the link, it looks almost like a blog. Each critical reflection will just be in a row. So it's super easy for the supervisor to follow. And then they write the comments and then they see the comments. We also added this cool feature in where the student could actually track their own competency development. And we created sort of an embedded chart where the student teacher could make links to their evidence of their mastery and not mastery, but their development of competencies over time. And that was pretty interesting feature for the students so that they could actually be kind of building their portfolio as they went through. And it was really easy to use. And there was a little collective home for them too that wasn't very successful per se. But the idea was that it would create a collective space where we'd be able to post files and where they could kind of view things. But really the heart of the matter and what they cared about was reading the critical reflections of the students. Now I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I don't like that mode. There we go. So in the end, we looked at, well, what happened? How did it go? And 21 of the faculty supervisors could see their student teachers' reflections. 3 of them never read any of them. So those 3 never ever went in and never saw any of it. And that wasn't so bad considering that it was a pilot, but still. 4 of them were very actively engaged in terms of actually writing responses. Like they'd go in and they'd write comments like the youngins will, you know, they were like very engaged. 6 of the others made a couple of comments, but most of them were just reading. So they were reading, but they weren't commenting. And then they would talk about them with their student teacher in their phone calls and in their pre-discussion as they're observing them. And we also witnessed that for most of them who were leaving comments, like a few here or there, it would be just as they were going to observe the student teaching, either just before or just after they would go in and read and then write a comment. So it was fitting in their rhythm of when they would actually observe the student teachers. And their perceptions of how it went, what they said was that overall, they thought the professional gatherings definitely helped them support student teachers' reflective practice. So us focusing on that, trying to help them understand what we meant, what we were doing in our classes, that was successful. They also reported it was really useful to have access to those reflections and to read them. So they liked reading them. But many fewer thought that actually commenting on them was relevant. And some of them appreciated leaving their own comments, but one person hated it. I love those people in a survey. Like, they hated it. They thought it was terrible that they could leave comments. And some of them liked the idea of being able to see their portfolios beyond the reflections, and others were like, because I was hoping for the future, that would be the next step, that they would encourage their students to create more meaningful portfolios. And some of them liked that idea and others didn't. So that was sort of a mixed reality. For many, they said that reading the critical reflections was helpful enough to make up for the time it takes, but the writing of the comments was just way too time consuming. And it's not part of, like, the way they're paid is weird. And so that was a whole issue of adding to their workload without really a fair way to compensate them. A few didn't even like the pressure that they felt they should write comments, even though we kept saying and we told the students, don't expect comments, they're reading them. They didn't like the pressure. They felt that some of the students expected them to. And a couple thought that it was bad that they were public, that the students' reflections could be viewed by the instructor and this small group of peers and themselves, which I found really weird. I was like, well, they were always posting these with their peers and for my class, but they felt like they wanted a personal critical reflection where the student could perhaps say things they wouldn't otherwise say. And I thought that was pretty interesting, actually, that the idea that it should be private. So one of them would go in and she'd tell them, please email it to me. And I was like, interesting. So you really don't like it being public. And that I thought was very interesting. For the peers comments, some of them liked the peers' comments, but not so much. But others really liked seeing the instructor comments and the facilitator comments. And they said it gave them a much better idea of what we expect. Because sometimes we have a supervisor who seems to expect our third years to be more like our second years. And other times they expect our third years to be more like our fourth years. And it can be hard to understand what level of development of competency we expect. But by seeing our comments, they could see when we were saying, oh, that's a great point, they'd see that we were pushing someone's thinking. They're like, oh, it's like, so it was revealing to them the level the students were actually at and our expectations. So they kind of liked our comments, but the peer comments not so much, and took too much time. And what's the point, those peer comments?
So Eva, I'd like you to wrap up if possible, please.
Definitely. All right. So, and sometimes, and some supervisors, I thought this was really interesting. They felt that the reflections were too long, too descriptive, which is a huge problem in teacher education, and perhaps not entirely honest. And I was like, wow, that was very, very perceptive, that they were, they saw things in the classroom and they would know. And so they were like, is that really reflecting the real experience you're having? And that made me feel that it was very helpful, actually, that we were having a more authentic experience. So just to conclude, it was an encouraging start. It certainly helped us see the importance of sharing perspectives and the importance of our relationships. The issue of workload and not being compensated for such a kind of pilot work was something that has to be addressed. If you want something like this to be successful, we're gonna have to figure out how many hours will it take and pay them for those hours. And I really thought that was absolutely critical to going forward with the project another year, in terms of if we wanted them to be looking at the portfolios and helping with that. Well, again, we're talking about workload and how much time will that take, and we'd have to bring that into our thinking about what their job is, what their role is. So that was basically it. I'll acknowledge Dr. Aiken. I don't think she ended up on as an author, but she should have been somehow. Anyway, Avril Aiken was heavily involved in the project, was like totally helped me all the time. And I also wanted to acknowledge the contributions of Tony Burris, actually my brother, who did the WordPress customization. And Wendy King was an instructor, but also a supervisor. She was super helpful. And our two mediators, Doug Cote and David Hops, they were absolutely essential to making this project work in our first brick, we hope, of a longer term project.
Thank you so much, Eva. That was really interesting, learning about supporting faculty supervisors in the reflective practice. And now I'd like to turn it over to Shanmugavalli. Thank you for joining us. You'll have to unmute, and yeah, you have to unmute, and then I'll invite you to share your screen, and we'll just work through it if there are any problems at all. And Shanmugavalli is going to talk to us about collaborative team learning as PD to manage challenges in an inquiry-based ESD classroom.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, we see it.
Perfect.
We're on slide 6, though. If you want us to start, click it. Yeah, there it is. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity because it means a lot to me. I get to share my insights, and this is my proposed research. Having defended my candidacy like a couple of months before, I really find this opportunity to be so big to share my thoughts and like have insights which would really help me to progress further, take my steps ahead. So my focus is about, my research focus is all about using collaborative team learning as a professional development model to support teachers manage challenges in using inquiry in an environmental sustainability and development classroom. So in today's presentation, I would do that in 2 parts. So the first part would be dealing with what exactly is environmental sustainability learning, and what does environmental sustainability learning requires from students. Like, what are the qualities or what are the learning practices that students should even have to develop a deeper understanding about sustainability concepts. And the second part would be all about using inquiry to teach environmental sustainability concepts, and in which I'm focusing on like how exactly inquiry could be an appropriate approach to teach ESD, and what are the challenges that teachers face in using inquiry to teach ESD, and how could a collaborative team learning could effectively help teachers manage these challenges. So, before even I could say that inquiry could be an appropriate pedagogical approach, I kind of wanted to share my understanding about what exactly is an environmental sustainability learning. So it is a long-term learning, and I also do understand that it does not happen like overnight. It does not happen on one fine morning. It is a long-term process of learning. It's a long-term learning process. But while students get involved in this particular learning, it kind of helps these kids, like these students or individuals, to transform their knowledge into responsible actions that can extend beyond understanding these sustainability concepts to become stewards of the planet. But more we say about, or more we talk about ESD learning, it is a holistic learning process. So when I say holistic, I just wanted to detail a bit more on that, saying like how exactly it is holistic. It is a student-centered learning, which requires students to have integrative learning practices. For example, like being in a classroom or being in a space, being in a learning space, they should know to question. At the same time, they should have the motivation to jump in a research, to jump in an investigation, to learn from real world experiences, to learn from problem solving, or have or develop these problem solving practices, or problem solving problem solving practices, learn from experiential learning. On top of all these, they also, like ESD also requires students to have interdisciplinary knowledge. For example, let's say like students want to talk or understand about air pollution. So just they need a bit of knowledge about biology there. They need a bit of knowledge about physics there. They need a bit of knowledge about engineering science there. So it requires different discipline knowledge, which actually adds an extra layer for these students to even understand environmental sustainability. So as I was saying, it's just not about the real world experiences or problem solving practices. It is also all about like experiential learning. So when I say experiential learning, it is all about experiencing it, reflecting on their own experiences, and then thinking about it and acting on it based on the experiences what they have. So all these integrated learning practices makes the process of learning environmental sustainability by itself a very complex one, or a complex process of learning. So, I mean, before I could say that inquiry could be an appropriate appropriate pedagogical approach, I just wanted to detail a bit about what exactly is inquiry-based pedagogical approach. So, I mean, inquiry-based pedagogical approach, it is a student-centered learning approach which embodies constructivist epistemology. So when I say constructivist epistemology, it is all about constructing knowledge. Let's say that students develop knowledge about one single concept based on an experience, and they encounter a different experience about the same concept. So it is all about trying to understand or trying to find the differences between the first experience and the second experience, which would even makes further more better understanding, conceptualizing both experiences together, and coming to a deeper understanding about that particular concept. So it actually helps students to construct knowledge constructively. And as earlier, as I was saying earlier, it is a student-centered learning. It is a process where students involved in a collaborative team learning. They they share knowledge, they share their experiences, develop knowledge from shared meaning, develop knowledge, and also they develop knowledge from scientific reasoning and evidence-based explanations. So, I mean, kind of understanding what exactly inquiry-based pedagogical approach is, I kind of believe that inquiry could be an appropriate methodology to teach, could be an appropriate pedagogical approach to teach ESD or sustainability concepts, because we have seen that ESD requires, or ESD kind of wants children wants students to involve in a holistic approach, having integrative learning practices, trying to conceptualize knowledge from different disciplines to understand one single concept in an environmental sustainability, in a ESD by itself. But so having inquiry on one side, if you could kind of go back to inquiry and see like what exactly does inquiry or how exactly does inquiry help students develop knowledge. So getting back to the previous slide, so inquiry helps students to develop knowledge by exactly involving in a real world problem, by exactly having evidence-based explanations, by exactly having explanations driven from their own data, like trying to research their own research questions, like doing a bit of research around their research questions, finding data that is relevant to their research questions, and then, trying to answer these research questions was what they have based on the data and the evidence, what they have collected. So making a detailed note of inquiry and having in mind the requirements for environmental sustainability learning, I kind of believe that inquiry could be inquiry could be an appropriate or could be a suitable pedagogical approach to teach environmental sustainability concepts. But then it is not as easy as I say, because being having given courses in my own department, teaching science concepts using inquiry, it does not happen in just one single click, right? It takes a lot amount of energy, time, dedication from teachers to even have a lesson plan that plays around inquiry. So designing a class based on inquiry is not that easy. On top of that, teaching environmental sustainability adds another layer of challenge, because environmental sustainability by itself is complex. So having two big complex parts like inquiry one and environmental sustainability being the second part, it is just not easy. Because as I was saying, like inquiry by itself is a multifaceted inquiry approach, multifaceted pedagogical approach, where teachers have to kind of help students develop the practice of questioning, develop the practice of involving in a research, develop the practice of investigating a question, develop the practice of collecting data and answering their questions based on the data, what they have collected, and based on the evidence, what they have gathered. So in addition to that, the interdisciplinary nature of ESD adds another layer of challenge for teachers. So talking about the multifaceted inquiry approach and the interdisciplinary nature of environmental sustainability, as I was saying before, structuring and designing an environmental sustainability classroom based on inquiry requires a lot more of time and specific skills from teachers. But at the same time, the amount of resources and the support platforms, what is available for teachers to say, let's say to help them develop what exactly is, to help them develop an understanding about what exactly is inquiry, to help them even understand how to manage the challenges in using inquiry in a classroom, or how to even use inquiry to teach environmental sustainability concepts is very limited. So, this is where my research or the model what I propose comes into play. So I'm proposing like team learning, collaborative team learning as a professional development model, which could eventually, or like which could effectively help teachers manage these challenges, because in this team learning space, so they build strong relationships with each other, and eventually these relationships or the memberships that they create within the team will allow them to share their instructional materials, will allow them to develop instructional practices. For example, let's say that one teacher comes into the collaborative learning space and says that, hey, I used this particular practice of questioning in the classroom for this particular concept or for this particular topic of environmental sustainability lesson. It really helped my classroom. It really helped my students to develop knowledge about this particular concept. So you could even practice the same. Or I used a video, I used a podcast in my class, and this podcast helped my students, understand better what exactly is this particular pollution or this particular water management system is. So while teachers develop this membership in their team learning space, they eventually start sharing their ideas. They start sharing their instructional practices, which would eventually help teachers manage the challenges in using inquiry in an environmental sustainability classroom. So in this particular learning space, learning really happens through collaborative interactions and reflections. So let's say like they play a video from the classroom and they say, hey, this worked, but then this could be done in a different way, like, giving feedback about their own peer practices. And then that practice or that feedback, could be absorbed by the teacher, and then they can go back to the classroom and implement the feedback and try it out. So what I'm proposing is this collaborative team learning professional development model could help teachers manage these challenges in this complex process of, teaching environmental sustainability. So as I was saying, this is my proposed research, and I haven't even, I'm looking forward to have the ethics clearance from McGill board to start my research and collect my data. So this is where I am at, and your feedback, your questions, and your insights would really help me to progress to the next level in my research. Thank you so much for the opportunity given.
Thank you so much, Shanmugavalli. That was lovely. So exciting. It really spoke to me. I think that, and both of your projects are very, very, very current.
Thank you.
Yep. So right now we're supposed to go to a breakout rooms, but there's me and there's the two of you, and then we have two participants. So I'm going to suggest, why don't we just open it up? You can stop sharing your screen perhaps, and then anybody who has a question or a comment, and if you want to go more private and go to a breakout room, go ahead. But I've labeled two breakout rooms, one Eva and one Shanmugavalli, but I don't know. Yeah, so Vandana has her hand up.
Hi, I have a question for Eva and then another one for Shanmugavalli, but I'll first go with Eva. And then if another person has a question, they can go next, and then I'll ask you. Eva, you were talking about the faculty supervisors, and you said the faculty supervisors were a mix of instructors and retired principals and other people who are involved, or maybe experienced teachers. Is that what you said?
The faculty, so when they are in a practicum, they're placed in classrooms. So they have an associate teacher, but those people were not involved in this project. And then we have people who go in and assess them in the classroom. So those are our faculty supervisors. And in this case, none of them were full-time faculty, but there was one person who teaches courses as contract faculty who was also a faculty supervisor. Oh, and I'm also wrong because one full-time faculty had a couple of students up north. So, but normally in the old days, in the good old days, faculty would actually go themselves And with all these cutbacks, one of the things that was let go of in many of these programs was that they wanted to hire people from, you know, part-time, pay them less basically. So, but I think it's great that they're actually from the field. I think it actually is excellent that they're largely from the field, but they are no longer practicing teachers because then they wouldn't be able to go supervise our students.
Right, and this raises the other question I have, because sometimes the people who actually supervise, so they kind of give feedback to the pre-service teachers who are actually, you know, go to schools to do their field work, right? So is there a gap between what the university expects or what the university expects the pre-service teachers, the competencies they want them to reach with respect to teaching versus what this faculty supervisors expect? Is there a mismatch in the expectations set by the university as well as the faculty supervisors? Because I've had conversations with in a university with the faculty, the instructor versus, you know, the supervisor. I feel like sometimes there's a mismatch happening there. I would like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there can be. And I think that was one of the things behind this project, was to try and help us meet more shared expectations. There's more of a mismatch though with the associate teachers, because our faculty supervisors are actually people, yes, they've been in the field much longer, and so you'd think they had teacher training that's very outdated, but they act as faculty supervisors over many years. And so we get together, we have professional development opportunities, they learn about the new competencies from the mini staff, and we do a bunch of work with them. So we're more, I'd say there's actually, it might seem surprising, but it's actually the host teachers. You'd think, oh, they're recent grads, but it doesn't matter. Like they're not, there's a real mismatch between, and you hear this a lot. They're like, sometimes I've heard associate teachers say, yeah, real teachers don't write lesson plans. And, you know, it's just so hard to take. We're like, actually they do, but sometimes it's in their head. Sometimes they're so experienced, they don't have to write it down. But you know, actually there's more of a mismatch between the actual teachers in the classroom, and things they say to our students are sometimes quite shocking, and they'll mock what they are learning in our universities, but they're not paid employees, right? They're teachers, they're paid, but not by the university. Whereas the faculty supervisors are actually paid by the university. So they sort of know better than that. And they're also being trained to understand why we have to follow the ministry expectations for a student graduating. They see what we're doing is part of our mandate. And so there's more of a collaborative feeling, but there's often a schism and of what they think we mean. And I've had some of our better faculty supervisors would be like, oh, Eva, like, can we just talk over lunch and look at this LES, which is just a, you know, awesome unit plan. And they're like, I just want to see what your model is like and help me put that in context of how I would write one. And so it's great when you can have those moments, but yeah, there's definitely issues. I mean, when you place your student teachers in a classroom where they denigrate the entire teacher education process, it's a little frustrating. And I think we see this is a big problem. But this project didn't deal with the associate teachers because it was a first step, and that is a much harder step where you reach out to them to help them, and they're not paid by us. So you really need funds where you can pay them to get them to do professional development. We've done great work like that. But overall, yeah, it's a big problem that actually practicing teachers often don't follow the ministry guidelines at all and want to teach our students not to.
Because I've also heard from pre-service teachers that once they get into school, they also are stuck with the expectation the school sets, the school, you know, the senior teachers set versus what they have learned in their teacher education. And they kind of have to not struggle, I think they just have to grapple with the different ideologies they have to see what works. And many times they tend to look up to the experienced teacher because they're right there. Yeah. Thanks for that.
I think that this is not a problem that is only with education. I'm actually a physiotherapist, and we have the same thing. You know, our physiotherapy students, we have to teach them black and white because it has to be very clear to them. But when they go out, all of a sudden in the clinic, oh, it's all gray zone, and they, you know, but this is part of maturing, and you have to learn the basics. And we also have accreditation. We have to teach them a certain way and meet those goals, those milestones. So I think that this is not simply only a problem with education, but thank you very much for bringing that up. You have a question for, yeah.
Just one thing I've noticed is the biggest schism I see is about assessment. And so I'll teach my students to assess what they teach. It's not rocket science, really. I mean, you teach something, you'd think it would seem quite natural to assess that. But many, many practicing teachers assess a host of other things. And so they'll take a rubric. They'll say, no, you need to use this rubric. The rubric assesses a bunch of things the student didn't teach, which is a complete breach of assessment practices. But it's very common in schools. There's even in some schools, like they'll have set rubrics that everyone has to use, and they have consultants paid who force everyone to use this, no matter what was taught. Like, so there's a huge schism with assessment, and that scares me because we're in a reform, and when you want reform, the only way you get it is by reforming assessment. And they'll reform their teaching practices, but they won't reform their assessment practices. And then even the young ones, I'm like, you were a recent grad, like that's shocking, you know, where they literally are breaching the ethical changes the government is demanding, where we show a more inclusivity, where we have a greater diversity in how we assess things. And they're like, no, they didn't do what I asked, they fail. And I'm just like, it's absolutely terrifying to me that reform will never work if we can't reform assessment, and the ministry needs to do a much better job in helping practicing teachers understand that assessment really isn't like it was in the 1960s, you know, and making it into a rubric doesn't make it alternative. It's just a bad rubric, measuring the wrong things. But there's a huge workload on the teachers, and I don't feel the ministry has given enough time to them to adjust. So but yeah, big issue for all of the people with practitioner training going on.
Good. So we'll move on to a question. I think, Vandan, you had a question for Shanmugavalli?
Yes. So congratulations on becoming the PhD candidate.
No, thank you.
So I have a few questions since you have submitted your ethics. You submitted your no? Oh, you're planning to. Okay. Yeah. So just a few questions to maybe think about what would your next steps be. So I was just wondering, who would be your participants for your research work?
High school environmental science teachers.
So is there a separate subject called environmental science for high school?
No, it is not a separate science, but then it is part of cycle 4 actually. It comes with the science and technology.
Okay, and how many teachers are you planning to recruit?
Currently, I have 2 teachers now, but I'm looking for one more.
Mm-hmm. And you said you wanted to do like a professional development with them?
I mean, I'm proposing collaborative team learning as a professional development model.
So are you planning like somebody would facilitate it? Like
no, it exactly, yeah. I'm not having any facilitators who are walking into the professional development model where they would give teachers, let's say, a workshop or stuff like that, but rather it would be like teachers by themselves collaborating and so it all comes from the teachers, like what they wanted to work on, what they wanted to improve on, what exactly is the inquiry practice they want to develop, how exactly is they want to manage the challenges in inquiry. So it all comes from the teachers. So I don't have any facilitators walking into the professional development space.
So what's your role in it, or what's your data?
What's my data?
Yeah, what kind of data are you planning to collect, and what do you think your role is?
I mean, for me, for my role, I would be a researcher, and the data what I'm collecting or what I'm planning to collect is audio recordings, video recordings, semi-structured interviews before and after the collaborative team learning, classroom observations. Yeah, so video recordings of the classroom observations, audio recording of the professional, the collaborative team learning meetings, yeah, semi-structured interviews with the teachers before and after the collaborative team learning.
Right, so you're going to be more like an observer when the collaborative meeting is happening. So you would probably help them, I don't know, maybe they will schedule the meetings and you will just be an observer capturing the interaction which is going on.
Yes, so my part, like my data would be all about the field notes that I have from the classroom observations, the field notes that I have from the collaborative team meetings. Yes, so I would be participating as a researcher and an observer. Yeah.
And what are you looking at in these interactions?
Sorry, I don't get your question.
So what are you looking for in this interaction? What's your research question? What are you looking for?
Oh, okay. So I'm looking to be very specific. I'm looking at what exactly or how exactly is the teachers. So what are the support structures that they develop from these collaborative team meetings that could help them manage these challenges, manage the challenges in using inquiry? So yeah, the support structures, what they develop from their collaborative interactions and from their collaborative learning. That like, yeah, more specifically, those are the structures or those are the supportive practices. Let's say, like, what are the supportive practices they would develop from these collaborative team meetings? That is something what I'm looking for.
Sounds interesting. And are you planning to choose the teachers, like with different experience, or do you have any?
No, it's voluntary participation. Yeah, you're right. I mean, wish I could choose the teachers, but then it is the voluntary participation from teachers. But with the two teachers, what I have now, they kind of have, I would not say that they are experienced teachers and they have experienced, they have a sound knowledge about inquiry, but then they know what inquiry is. So that's the level of the knowledge what they have about inquiry, and that's where my participants are currently.
Okay, and something for you to think about is how do you classify them as an inquiry-based teacher? You know, like how do we? Yeah, that's something for you to think for future. Like how do you?
Can you please expand on that question? Like, what do you mean by, like, how do you?
Like, how do you know that this teacher actually follows inquiry? Like, how do you?
Okay, so for that, you know, in my methodology, what I'm having is even before going into my collaborative team learning, or even before I could go into the classroom observations. So the very first semi-structured interview that I have with my teachers will give me a knowledge about, or will give me an understanding about what is their knowledge about inquiry, what they know about inquiry. And I also have planned for video recordings of their classroom observations even before the semi-structured interviews to know. I mean, I do know that teachers say something, but when they practice and when they walk into their classroom, it's completely different. Like, you know, I'm not saying that I'm blaming the teachers and I'm not complaining them, but then they would have in their mind, or that sits in their head, but then practicing it or implementing it would be a different story. So yes, I do have the idea of video recording the teachers and kind of having, so it's for my own understanding to see what exactly, or is there even a mismatch between what teachers say and what they practice in their classroom. So this is how I'm planning to understand the knowledge what teachers have about inquiry in teaching environmental sustainability concepts.
And
is that something what you're looking for, or did I even answer your question?
No, you did.
As a follow-up question, I think you're going to have to be careful how you, what it is you're actually looking at, whether you're looking at the veracity of what they're saying, you know, the truthfulness, the accuracy of what they say, as we heard with Eva's group.
Yeah.
They were saying not necessarily what they were actually doing in the classroom.
No.
Very interesting.
That's something that shocked me, actually. I know, like, you know, I don't have field experience. Like, I'm still at the stage of having things in my own world, but then I do know that I will be shocked and I will be surprised walking into a classroom. So yeah, I'm really making myself, putting my thoughts together and getting confident. Okay, Shanmugavalli, don't lose your confidence. This is how what's going to be, and this is how it's going to look like. Yes, yeah.
How many
definitely I look into it.
How many teachers did you say you're planning to involve in your project?
Currently, I have 2. I'm looking for another one. Yeah, if I have one, that would make a good group of 3 teachers. But if I'm not having, then I would be even happy with 2.
I had a friend who did her dissertation on sort of related things, but when she had a survey to figure out which teachers to pick, she had a survey that she did with students to ask about what the teacher did, and she was amazed. Like, she's like, students had no, like, that totally did not work. Students would say, yes, there was group work, no group work. Yes, there was this, no. She was that was a total bomb. And what worked for her was the observations, like you're talking about. But she was like, student surveys, complete mess. She's like, maybe they don't know what we mean. Maybe they just have no idea what their teachers do or don't care. I don't know, but it was a complete mess for her. So she had to go in and record, like you were saying, to observe the teachers practice.
Actually, this is something what came up in my candidacy defense, and one of my committee members said that no, Harini, like, no, Shanmugavalli, it doesn't work that way. I know you are super ambitious, but then you walk into your classroom, teachers would say something and they do a different thing in their classroom. So it's better you record them and you play the record in your semi-structured interview and say that this is something, is this something what you were talking about? Is this something what you want to focus on? So, this is something what came up in my candidacy defense, and it was really helping me to plan my methodology.
Good. Well, I think that this has been a very interesting small intimate group, and I thank you so much, Eva and Shanmugavalli, for being with us. And now the next activity is apparently live music and games, live remote music and games with prizes. So hey, at the rooftop terrace. So you have time for a bio break and then head on up to the terrace. So thank you very much, and thank you, Vandana, for all your questions.
Thank you very much, and good luck, Shanmugavalli.
Oh, thank you so much, Vandana. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, all of you.
Bye.
Bye.